year was 1899, and Montgomery County sat heavy under a blanket of heat that made the air shimmer like rippling glass. Dust rose with every step along the narrow dirt roads, clinging to sweat and fabric alike. In the evenings, cicadas screamed from the treetops, and the scent of sweetgrass mixed with the tang of metal from the nearby mill. But beyond the hum of small-town life, there was a farmhouse that no one liked to speak of, standing lopsided at the edge of the cotton fields. It was there that little Lily Crane lived, alone with her ailing mother, and with that unsettling porcelain doll she called Clara. From a distance, Lily looked like any other child, barefoot, small with the softness of youth still untouched by time. But something in her silence held weight. When the other children would run laughing past the fence line, Lily only watched, her wide grey eyes fixed on them as though she didn't fully understand what she was seeing, or perhaps didn't care to. She spoke rarely, and when she did, it was usually to the doll. The doll itself was foreign to that part of the world. It wasn't like the rough cotton rags most girls stitched for themselves. Clara had a porcelain face, polished so smooth that the sunlight slid off it like water. Her eyes were hand-painted glass, blue and unblinking. Her lips, too red, some thought, were shaped into the faintest of smiles, the kind that promised secrets never meant to be told. Her lace dress, yellowed with age but still delicately woven, looked better suited for a parlor shelf than an Alabama porch. Yet every afternoon there was Lily, sitting under the old pecan tree behind the farmhouse, holding Clara on her lap as if she were cradling something still alive. The townsfolk began to notice things. A strange stillness around the Crane property. The faint scent of copper drifting on the wind when Lily played in the yard. The way her mother, Martha Crane, hadn't been seen standing in weeks. It was Mrs. Jefferson, the Cranes' nearest neighbor, who first spoke of what she'd seen with her own eyes one humid morning. She had been hanging laundry when she looked over toward the fence line and saw the girl sitting in the dirt. Lily held a tin cup in one hand, carefully tilting it against the doll's lips. The doll's face glistened as if touched with something sticky. For a moment, Mrs. Jefferson thought nothing of it. A child pretending, feeding her toy with milk or water, as children do. But when Lily looked up suddenly, the older woman caught a glimpse of the liquid in that cup. It was thick, dark, almost black in the sun that night, she told her husband. She was feeding that doll, she said, her voice low, rough with disbelief. He scoffed. Probably blood from the hog they slaughtered last week. You know, that's what they've been living off of since the old man passed. Mrs. Jefferson nodded but didn't speak again. The image stuck with her, the red lining around the doll's porcelain mouth. The calm, near-hypnotic way Lily had stared at it. Inside the Crane house, the air was stale. The faint hum of flies circled over dishes in the sink. A silver cross hung crooked on the kitchen wall, its shadow stretching long in the dim lamplight. Martha Crane lay in her bed upstairs, her breathing light and uneven, the sound closer to whistling than respiration. Her sickness had taken her strength, but not her eyes. They watched everything, especially her daughter. There were days when she tried to speak, to tell Lily to run to town for supplies or to fetch the preacher. But each time Lily would hush her softly, saying the same thing. Clara says I shouldn't leave you, Mama. She says we don't need anyone else. Martha had once tried to throw the doll out. Early that spring, before the fever worsened, she'd carried it out behind the house and buried it beneath the pecan tree. But by morning, when she looked from her bedroom window, Lily was sitting there once again, brushing dirt from the doll's face. The ground where Martha had dug was untouched, smooth as if nothing had ever been buried at all. As summer pressed on, the rumors grew thicker than the air. The mill workers whispered about the Cranes while washing up in the river after their shifts. Some said they heard the girl talking in two voices out behind the house. Others swore they saw candlelight burning behind the windows after midnight, though the family could barely afford kerosene. Still, no one dared to go up the road themselves. Country folk knew when to leave certain things alone. Then in late August, the Shaw's youngest boy went missing. Only for a night. He was found the next morning asleep in the barn. But what he told his parents sent a chill through the entire town. He said he'd been following a little girl with a white dress and a doll. She had asked him if he'd like to see where she fed her friend. The boy claimed he followed her through the trees until he got lost near the Crane property. He didn't remember how he got home. Sheriff Wallace came knocking 2 days later, hat in hand, a column of dust behind him. Lily opened the door, her small fingers gripping the wood tightly. Behind her the house was dark. He asked if her mother was home. "She's asleep," Lily said. He leaned on the frame, squinting past her shoulder. "Folks been saying strange things, sweetheart. Ain't nothing wrong here, is there?" "No, sir," she replied, eyes flat and steady. "Mama says the Lord's watching over us." The sheriff tipped his hat and left, but as he stepped down the porch he noticed something. Lying beneath the window was a small porcelain hand, the kind you'd find on a fine doll. It was cracked clean off, the edges speckled dark brown like dried rust. He meant to ask Lily about it, but when he looked back the door had already closed. By September the fields wilted, and with them the patience of the townsfolk. The preacher's wife gathered a few of the churchwomen and knocked on the crane door one Sunday afternoon, baskets of bread in hand. They found the girl sitting cross-legged on the porch, humming softly. The tune was unfamiliar, slow and childlike, but strange in its rhythm. When they greeted her, Lily looked up, those clear grey eyes shining in the shade. One of the women asked if she'd like to join them back at church, that the congregation missed seeing her and her mother. Lily tilted her head. "I can't leave Clara," she said plainly. "What do you mean, dear?" The preacher's wife asked. "The last time I left her alone, Mama got worse." The women exchanged uneasy glances. Behind them, the clouds were swelling dark over the horizon, promising a storm. None of them stayed long. That evening, as thunder rolled across the fields, a single lamp burned in the upstairs window of the crane house. Rain began to fall, slow, heavy drops tapping against the roof. From the road, a traveller passing through swore he saw something. A small girl in a white dress standing barefoot beneath the pecan tree, the doll propped on her knees. The lightning flashed once, twice, and just before he turned away, he thought he saw the silver gleam of that cup again, held to the doll's painted lips. And though he never told another soul, he swore he heard the child whisper through the rain, "She's thirsty again." The next morning brought no sunlight, only the dull grey wash of a storm left hanging over the land. The Crane farmhouse sat quiet beneath a sky swollen with humidity. Rainwater still clung to the roof, dripping slowly into the red dirt below. Inside, the air was thick with the sour smell of sickness and something faintly metallic. Flies buzzed around the half-open kitchen window, where a bowl of milk had curdled overnight. Lily moved through the rooms barefoot, careful not to wake her mother upstairs. Her small footsteps made no sound. She set Clara on the worn kitchen table and began to pour water into a chipped mug, lips moving soundlessly. Whatever she whispered seemed meant only for the doll. For a moment her face softened into a smile, one strangely adult for a child. Then, as though remembering something solemn, she fell quiet again and lifted the cup to her own mouth. When she drank, her expression didn't change. Only after lowering it did she glance toward the staircase, where every creak carried the weight of her mother's fading breath. Martha Crane's room was dim and sour with damp linen. The curtains had been drawn weeks ago, leaving the space in a constant half-light. The woman on the bed had once been handsome, with high cheeks and a bright laugh that could be heard all the way to the field. Now her frame looked carved from wax, the skin thin as parchment and shining with fever. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak when Lily entered. "Lily, what day is it?" she whispered. "Tuesday," the girl answered, setting a bowl on the bedside table. "I made you broth." Martha tried to sit, but her arms shook. "You been out to town?" Lily shook her head. "Clara doesn't like when I go. She says we have enough." Her mother's eyes fluttered, but she said nothing. Sometimes she tried to remind herself that children spoke to their toys. It was harmless, a phase. But there was something in Lily's tone, a grave certainty that didn't belong to her age. Later that morning, a knock came at the door. The sound startled Martha awake from a fevered sleep, and she called weakly for Lily. The girl went to the entryway, standing on her toes to lift the wooden latch. On the porch stood a woman in a dark shawl, holding a basket of pears. Miss Edith Collier, the schoolteacher, had been sent by the churchwomen who worried for the Cranes. "Good morning, Lily," she said softly, rain-soaked curls sticking to her temple. "We've missed you at the schoolhouse." "I can't go," Lily replied, staring at the basket. Edith tried to smile. "You'll come soon, I hope. How's your mama?" "Sleeping. She's tired all the time." Edith hesitated, looking past her into the gloom. She caught sight of the doll sitting on the table, its face turned toward the window. "That's a pretty doll," she said, forcing cheer. "Your father got it for you, didn't he?" Lily looked down at her own bare feet. "He didn't buy it. A man gave it to him. He said it was meant for someone like me." "Someone like you?" The girl nodded. "Someone who doesn't cry." Something in the way she said it made Edith's stomach tighten. She stepped closer to the threshold, lowering her voice. "Lily, if you need anything, food, medicine, you can ask me, you hear?" Lily's eyes flicked upward, cold and unreadable. "Clara says we don't take what isn't ours." Then she closed the door before Edith could answer. That same afternoon, thunder rolled again across the fields. Martha woke coughing, reaching weakly toward the nightstand, where a small ceramic bowl sat half-filled with something dark. Lily rushed to her, setting a hand on her shoulder. "Don't!" the woman hissed. "Don't bring me that!" "It helps you sleep," Lily said. "You always sleep better after." Her mother turned her face away, tears cutting thin paths through the pale skin of her cheeks. "What is it, Lily? What's in that bowl?" "You told me I was a good daughter," the girl answered. "Good daughters take care of their mammas." There was no arguing with her tone. Martha wept silently while her child slipped from the room, returning moments later with a small cloth-wrapped bundle. The smell hit her before Lily even unfolded it. The sharp iron scent of blood. She screamed hoarsely, but Lily only hushed her, pressing a finger to her lips. "It's all right," she whispered. "It's from the rabbits. Clara showed me how." By evening, lightning was flashing again in the distant hills, and a new visitor came to the property, a mill hand named Otis Griggs. He had been one of her father's old co-workers and had promised to look in on the cranes from time to time. He arrived muddy, hat in hand, and called out before stepping onto the porch. When no one answered, he pushed the door open slightly. "Martha," he called. The smell that drifted out nearly turned him back. Sickness, mold, and the tang of something raw. He took one careful step inside. The house was silent, save for the faint hum of rain on wood. Then from the kitchen, a small voice. "She's resting," it said. Lily stood in the doorway, her dress stained at the hem. He let out a slow breath. "You all right, darling? You need me to fetch a doctor?" "No, sir, Mama just needs quiet. You shouldn't be here." He wiped the sweat from his brow and peered past her toward the stairs. "I ain't gonna stay long, just making sure." His voice faltered as he noticed something gleaming beside the doll on the table. A small knife, its blade faintly stained. The handle looked far too large for Lily's hands. His stomach turned. "Where'd you get that?" "Papa's," she said calmly. "He left it for me. Maybe you ought to put it away before you hurt yourself." She smiled, small and strange. "I don't get hurt." Otis hesitated, uneasy. He glanced at Clara, the doll's glossy eyes catching the grey light through the window. For a split second, he thought they flickered, as if something had moved behind them. He blinked, but they remained still. Maybe it was just the storm shadow. He muttered something about coming back another day and backed out the door, leaving muddy tracks down the steps. That night, the wind carried the smell of wet earth and iron from the Crane house all the way to the Jeffersons' porch. Martha's coughing stopped around midnight, replaced by silence. In the faint glow of lamplight, Lily sat beside her bed, holding her mother's hand with one and the porcelain doll with the other. The storm whined through the cracks in the roof. When the wind shifted, the doll's lace sleeve brushed against Martha's arm, and the dying woman stirred weakly. Her eyes opened for just a heartbeat, seeing her daughter's face hovering pale and serene above her. "Lily," she rasped. "Please, and don't listen to her anymore." The girl's head tilted ever so slightly. "She's the only one who listens to me." Outside, the rain began to fall again, hard and steady, pounding against the tin roof. By dawn, the storm had passed, and a heavy stillness lay over the fields. Smoke rose from a chimney somewhere far off, and the first church bell of Sunday morning echoed faintly through the valley. In that house on the edge of town, the door remained closed, the windows dark, and a single doll sat upright on the kitchen table, its porcelain lips glistening with something that caught the light like the edge of a blade. By the second week of September, the storms had quieted, but the air remained heavy and close as if the clouds refused to leave. The Crane farmhouse looked greyer with each rising sun, the wood darkened by damp weather and neglect. The neighbors had stopped knocking by then. Even the preacher hesitated when passing the narrow road that led toward the property. People said there were shadows in the windows at night, shapes that didn't belong to the living. Others whispered that Martha Crane's coughing had stopped, but the house still breathed after dark. Only one man seemed unbothered by the talk, a traveling merchant named Samuel Black, who rode into Montgomery County that month, his wagon creaking beneath the weight of trinkets and fabrics from Louisiana. He was a broad man, with wind-burned skin and a smile far too easy for strangers. Children liked him because he carried sweets wrapped in paper, and the women appreciated the fine lace and perfume bottles lined neatly in his cart. But Samuel came for more than peddling. He was also a collector, of debts, of curiosities, and of stories. And when he stopped at the general store that morning, he overheard one that caught him sharply. It was the storekeeper, Amos Hodge, telling a customer about the Crane place. "Girl ain't right," he muttered. "Talks to a doll all day. Folks say she's feeding that thing with, well, things a girl shouldn't be touching." Samuel set down the tin of tobacco he'd been inspecting. "A doll, you say?" "Mm-hmm," said Hodge. "Porcelain one. Fancy dress, glass eyes. Don't belong in a house like that." The merchant's brow furrowed. "You recall what it looked like exactly?" "Not me," Hodge shrugged. "But my wife swears she saw it once when the Cranes came by some years back. Said it was beautiful and strange. Asked where they got it, and the father said some merchant sold it to him after Christmas." Samuel went still. "How long ago?" Hodge wiped his hands. 3 years, maybe 4. Why?" The merchant smiled tightly, though the look in his eyes didn't match. "Just curious. I sell trinkets all over, and sometimes the same ones find their way back." That afternoon, Samuel turned his wagon toward the far edge of the county. The path grew narrow and wild, the kind that swallowed sound. When he reached the farmhouse, the yard was silent except for the faint rustle of the pecan tree. The window shutters hung uneven, and one of them rocked with the wind like slow breathing. He called out once before stepping off his wagon. "Anyone home?" No answer came, only the faint scrape of something inside. Then the door opened halfway, and there she was, Lily Crane, barefoot, a pale wisp of a child with hair hanging around her face like damp rope. "Good afternoon," Samuel said, tipping his hat. "Name's Black. I'm a trader. Thought you folks might want some supplies." Lily didn't blink. "We don't buy things anymore." He nodded carefully. "I reckon that's fine. I was just passing through. Do you happen to remember me?" Her head tilted slightly, eyes narrowing. "You gave me Clara," she said simply. Samuel felt his stomach knot. He forced a laugh. "So you named her Clara, did you?" "That's a fine name. She told me that's what it was," Lily replied. He hesitated. "Told you?" Lily turned her gaze toward the table behind her. The doll sat there perfectly upright, half in shadow. Even from the doorway, Samuel recognized it, the delicate stain of gold in the lace, the single crack running across the left eyebrow. He remembered that doll. No other like it in his collection. It hadn't sold easily either. He'd only parted with it out of desperation that winter, after the mill accident in town brought him good business from grieving families. The man who bought it had paid in silence, and Samuel hadn't thought of it again until now. Something about seeing it again, sitting there years later, sent a chill crawling up his back. "You know," he began, forcing a smile, "that doll's got quite a story. Came from overseas, they told me. All the way from France. People say the craftsman put too much care into them, like he wanted them to look alive." "She's not from there," Lily said. "She's from here." "How do you mean?" "She told me she belonged to another little girl once, not far from here. But that girl didn't take care of her, so Clara came to find me." Samuel swallowed hard, the air in the house suddenly too heavy to breathe. He wanted to ask where her mother was, but before he could, a faint sound came from upstairs, a dragging, brittle movement like fabric brushing against wood. His eyes darted upward toward the staircase. Lily didn't flinch. "Mamma's resting," she said softly. "You'll wake her if you stay." The merchant nodded slowly, stepping backward toward the porch. "Of course. Don't mean no harm, sweetheart. I just wanted to check in. I can leave you some sugar, maybe a loaf. She doesn't like visitors." The door began to close, the small face disappearing into darkness. Before it shut completely, Samuel said without meaning to, "That doll's not meant for children." The silence that followed stretched long. Then Lily whispered through the crack, "Neither am I." The latch clicked shut. He didn't remember the ride back to town clearly. The road blurred through the trees, and when he looked down at his hands, they were trembling. That night, he told no one what he'd seen, only that the little Crane girl looked half dead herself. But sleep did not come easy. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw that porcelain face staring back, not with painted eyes, but with something awake behind them. 2 days later, Samuel convinced himself to return. Maybe it was guilt, maybe curiosity, or maybe it was the thought that the doll he'd once sold, a thing said to be cursed, had ended up in a child's hands. He left his wagon in the woods before dawn and approached on foot. The house was still. Dew glistened on the grass and smoke curled faintly from the chimney, though he heard no chopping, no voices. He reached the porch and noticed smears near the step's edge, thin streaks of brown-black, almost hidden against the wood grain. A closer look revealed what he feared. Dried blood, he called softly this time. "Lily?" His voice barely carried. The door creaked open without a touch. Inside, the smell hit him like a blow. Not rot exactly, something older, thicker. He covered his nose with his sleeve and stepped in. The first thing he saw was the doll on the floor, sitting upright against the leg of a chair, streaked red around the mouth. The air was so still he could hear each drop of rainwater fall from his boots. A sudden sound upstairs, a soft gasp, then silence. He took one hesitant step toward the staircase. Lily, nothing. He climbed slowly, the boards groaning beneath his weight. At the top stood a half-open door. He pushed it with trembling fingers, the hinge moaning. The room beyond was dim, lit by the morning's weak light through the curtains. A shape lay on the bed, Martha Crane motionless beneath a thin sheet. Her skin had turned the dull color of candle wax, and her eyes were open to the ceiling. Samuel staggered back, the bile rising in his throat. He reached for the wall to steady himself. Then he heard it, a small breath close to his ear. "You shouldn't have come back, Mr. Black," he spun. Lily stood in the doorway, eyes wide, expression calm. Her fingers held something metallic, and when the light shifted, he saw a smear of red running down the blade. Behind her, just barely visible, was the doll she cradled like an infant. "She says you lied to my father," Lily murmured. "She says you cheated him." No, Samuel stammered. "That's not true, child. She says you took something that belonged to her first." Before he could speak again, she stepped closer, the floor creaking under her bare feet. Through the haze, Samuel realized the bowl on the table by the bed was half full of liquid dark as wine. And then he understood. Whatever was left of Martha Crane wasn't just dead, it had been emptied. He stumbled backward into the hall, clutching the banister as he bolted down the stairs. Behind him, faint but clear, came the sound of a girl's laughter, high, bright, and mechanical. It lingered long after he fled into the daylight, even after the trees swallowed the house from view. That night, when the townsfolk saw Samuel's wagon flying down the main road, they said he looked like a man who'd seen the devil himself. He stayed only long enough to warn the sheriff. "There's something in that house," he told him. "But it ain't just the girl." Then he left Montgomery County and never returned. The news spread through Montgomery County quicker than wildfire. By dawn the next day, every porch and store counter buzzed with talk of what the merchant had said he saw. Some thought Samuel Black had gone mad from the heat. Others whispered that maybe the girl really was cursed. But one man couldn't ignore it. Sheriff Harold Wallace, a broad man seasoned by years of chasing drunks and cattle thieves, not ghosts. He didn't believe in curses. He believed in what could be found, touched, measured. So when he saddled his horse that morning and headed down the narrow trail toward the Crane farm, he told himself there'd be a simple explanation waiting for him at the end. The house came into view just as the fog began to lift. It looked smaller than he remembered, its roof sagging, the walls faded gray. There was no sign of movement, no smoke from the chimney, no sound of hens. He dismounted, boots crunching over damp clay, and knocked hard on the door. Nothing. The only reply came from the pecan tree, limbs rustling faintly in the wind. He called out again, "Lily?" Still silence. After the third knock, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air inside clung to him like wet cloth. His nose twisted at the sweet, spoiled smell that came from somewhere deeper within. The kitchen was dim but tidy, dishes stacked neatly by the sink, a thin film of dust coating them all. The doll sat on the table again, turned toward the door as if it had been waiting. Its pale face caught the light, and a faint reddish tint stained its mouth. The sheriff grunted, half in disgust, half in fear, and muttered to himself, "Kids." The sound of dripping drew his attention to the back room. He followed it until he was standing before the wash basin, perched on a short stand by the window. The thin curtains shifted with the breeze, revealing what filled it, water clouded and streaked with red. Blood. The edges had dried into a crust above the rim. He leaned closer and saw, floating within, strands of dark hair. He straightened quickly, the smell of iron blooming sharp in his throat. His pulse thudded heavy beneath his badge. "Lily?" he called again, louder this time. "You best come on out now." Still nothing. Then, just as he turned toward the stairs, a soft creak answered from above. Hand on his holster, he climbed step by step, the boards groaning under his weight. The second-floor corridor was narrow and dim, only one door open at the end. He stepped toward it slowly. Inside was a bed stripped of everything, but a thin sheet that barely covered the body beneath. Martha Crane lay still, her face pale and waxy. He'd seen dead folks before, but what unsettled him wasn't her stillness, it was the precision. Not a mark on her skin, yet her lips were colorless and her eyes oddly sunken, like she'd been drained of something deeper than life. The window beside her had been nailed shut. Then from behind him came the faintest laugh. A small child's laugh, quick and hollow. He turned fast, gun raised, but the hallway was empty. "Who's there?" he barked, no answer. Below, the hinge of the front door groaned, followed by light footsteps across the floor. He hurried back down, weapon drawn, and found her standing near the kitchen table. Lily Crane, her dress grey with dirt, the porcelain doll tucked under her arm. "What are you doing here, Sheriff?" she asked, voice calm. He swallowed. "You gave me quite the scare, little one. Folks been worried about your mama. She's resting upstairs," she said softly. "Yeah, I saw that," he muttered. "Sweetheart, you know she's gone, don't you?" Lily's head tilted. "Clara says she isn't gone. Just quiet now." He shifted uneasily, glancing at the doll. Its cracked left eye gleamed in the sunlight, slanting through the window. The sheriff took a step forward. "You mind telling me what's in that basin out back?" "Medicine," Lily replied. "That looked like blood. It's what helps Mama sleep." His jaw tightened. He holstered his pistol, crouching lower so their eyes met. "Darlin', where did you get that doll?" She looked down at it fondly. "Papa brought her home the day before he died." "You remember where from?" Lily's lips pressed together. "A man with a wagon. He said she's special. He said she was made for me." "That man back then, he come round again," Wallace said carefully. "Said he saw something real strange here. You didn't hurt anybody, did you, Lily?" Her gaze turned sharp. "Why do grown-ups always think I hurt people?" He froze for a moment. Maybe she didn't understand. Maybe she did. He reached for her arm gently. "Come on now. Let's go into town, get you fed. We'll talk about your mama later." But the girl didn't move. Instead, she turned toward the doll and whispered something too quiet to catch. When she looked back, her expression was blank again. "Clara says we can't leave her behind." "She can come too, all right?" he said quickly, trying to stay calm. He grabbed the doll and tucked it under his arm, surprised by its coldness. The porcelain felt almost wet, slick to the touch. He set his jaw and guided Lily toward the door. As they stepped into the sunlight, she murmured, "She doesn't like when other people hold her." "Well, she'll manage," he replied, forcing a smile. They made it halfway across the yard when Lily stopped. "Sheriff Wallace," she said. "Yeah?" "She says you shouldn't turn around." The words came out so steady that it froze him mid-step. His fingers tensed on the doll, chills crawling up his arms. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked. But when he turned, the pecan tree stood still behind them, its low branches creaking in the wind. Nothing there, only the empty field, the soft rattle of leaves. He exhaled and looked back at Lily. Her face was as pale as bone, her eyes wide with quiet certainty. "She doesn't like being held," she repeated. Before he could speak, a sharp, searing pain cut through his forearm. He dropped the doll with a cry, stumbling back as blood ran from a deep scratch carved across his skin. The doll hit the dirt upright, chin tilted toward him. Its hand, a porcelain fingertip now smeared red, rested on a shard of glass hidden within the folds of its dress. Lily bent and picked it up gently, sighing. "I told you," she murmured. "Now you made her angry." He pressed his sleeve against the wound, trying to steady his breath. "That's enough, Lily. Give me the doll." But she only walked back toward the house. "Don't you go in there," he shouted. "Lily!" At the door, she turned slightly, her voice small but stern. "You should wash it off before it spreads." "Wash what off?" She paused. Her touch. The door creaked shut behind her, the sound soft but final. The sheriff stood frozen for a long while, before stumbling toward his horse. The sting in his arm worsened with each passing minute, the veins running dark beneath the swelling skin. By the time he reached town, he could barely hold the reins. That evening, as the doctor wrapped his arm, he recounted the story to the preacher and a few of the town's men. None believed the part about the doll, though they couldn't explain the wound, thin and precise as if cut by a blade. The preacher gathered a group to ride out at sunrise, determined to put rest to wicked nonsense. But when they reached the Crane place the next morning, it was empty. The door hung open, the furniture untouched. Only one thing remained in the yard, the wash basin overturned, its water soaked deep into the soil, leaving behind a rust-colored stain that would not fade for years, and no one ever found Lily Crane again. By the time the sun rose over Montgomery County again, the story of Lily Crane had turned into something larger than rumor. People spoke of curses and witchcraft, of voices in the trees and the sound of laughter in the wind. Even those who hadn't seen the doll swore they could picture its face, those bright glass eyes, that half-smile glinting somewhere between innocence and hunger. Fear crept into every conversation. Husbands barred windows at night, and mothers told their children never to go near the old pecan grove. Something everyone agreed was still out there. The preacher had not returned to the pulpit since the night of the burning. He kept to his house with curtains drawn tight, praying in silence. He told no one about the porcelain hand he'd found. Meanwhile, Sheriff Wallace's condition worsened. The wound on his arm had turned black, the veins branching like roots along his skin. By Thursday, he couldn't bend his fingers, yet he refused a doctor. "It ain't medicine that'll fix this," he muttered. "It's fire." That week, he called a meeting at Hodge's store. The air inside was thick with tobacco and dread. "We can't leave it there," he said. "If the preacher burned that thing and it's still showing up, then it's buried in that land somehow. Every bad thing that's happened since that family settled came from that field. We burn it down, there was no debate." By sundown, a dozen men gathered with torches and barrels of kerosene loaded onto wagons. The women stayed home behind locked doors. Prayers murmured through cracked windows. As twilight bled into dark, the line of men rode out toward the Crane property, flames lighting their path like sentinels of anger. None noticed the faint movement following from the trees, small footsteps, steady and light, keeping to the shadows. When they reached the edge of the field, the old pecan tree still stood, long branches sprawling outward like crooked fingers. The ground beneath it was scarred with ash where the pyre had burned days earlier. "We start here," Wallace said, his voice rough with fever. He dismounted, sloshed kerosene across the roots, then struck a match. The first flare rose high, snapping through the dry grass. The others followed, spreading the fire in long lines that hissed and roared into the night. The sky turned orange. Sparks drifted upward like fireflies, and heat rolled through the dark as the flames caught the edges of the farmhouse. The men stood back, faces glowing red in the light. The sheriff's arm shook visibly as he raised a torch. "For what's gone and what won't come again," he said aloud. "Let it all burn." Their voices joined as one final whoop when the roof caved in. Wood cracked. Windows shattered. Smoke poured heavy into the open sky, but as the roar grew louder, a strange sound came with it, a low rhythmic hum like singing beneath the fire. The men exchanged uneasy looks. Then through the doorway of the collapsing house, a small shape appeared. It was a girl. Barefoot, dress glowing like a lantern in the flames, she walked slowly through the smoke, her face pale, her arms clutching something close to her chest. The sheriff froze first. "Lily?" he whispered. The girl stopped at the edge of the fire line. In her arms was the doll, spotless, untouched by soot. The men fell silent, the only sound the hiss of burning timber. Lily's eyes reflected the light, gleaming like mirrors. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her voice carrying strangely through the heat. "She doesn't like fire." Wallace stepped forward, hand unsteady on his revolver. "You stay right there, sweetheart. We ain't gonna hurt you." "You already did," she said softly. "So now she's hungry again. One of the men, Otis Griggs, spat and crossed himself. "Lord forgive me," he muttered, then swung his torch forward, sending a fresh wave of sparks toward her. But before the flames reached her, the wind turned. A sudden gust swept through the field, bending the flames backward. The fire split, curling around the child without touching her. The men stumbled away, clutching their hats as ash slapped against their faces. Through the smoke, Lily's outline wavered, but her voice came clear as a bell. "She says you all forget who made her first." Then the fire collapsed inward, swallowing the house in a final surge. The ground shuddered. The tree behind them cracked with a groan and fell. When the men cleared their eyes, the girl was gone. Only the doll remained, lying near the roots of the fallen pecan, face down in the dirt. Wallace pulled his bandana over his mouth and moved closer, every instinct screaming not to touch it. But some part of him needed to know for certain. He nudged it with his boot. The porcelain turned under the sole, still warm from the blaze. Its eyes were open, fixed directly on him. He stumbled back. "We're done here," he croaked. "Let it burn till sunrise." By morning, the field was nothing more than smouldering ash. The farmhouse was gone. The tree stood half-burnt, its trunk split in two. Somewhere beneath the rubble, they buried the sheriff's badge. Wallace hadn't survived the night. His fever had claimed him before dawn. The rest of the men returned home silently, their faces drawn and grey. 3 days later, a farmer named Clyde Turner found something beside the riverbank 2 miles away. A broken doll's head, porcelain white, half buried in mud. Its painted mouth was stained red, as if it had been smiling through blood. He kicked it into the current and never spoke of it again. That should have been the end. But in the weeks that followed, small fires began to appear across the county. Barns, stables, even a stretch of woods near St. Matthew's. Each time, people swore they saw a child walking along the ridge before the flames caught. The preacher called for prayers, but even he stopped leaving the church after sundown. Some said it wasn't Lily anymore. Others said it always had been, and that whatever she carried had finally become part of her. By October, the rains came, washing away what little remained of the Crane land. The basin, the burned soil, the ash, all disappeared beneath fresh grass. Where the pecan tree once stood, a single wildflower grew, pale and colorless against the green. The children who passed by on their way to school learned not to pick it. They said if you looked too long at it, you'd see a tiny reflection in its petals, blue and glassy, blinking once before fading away. And when storms returned in the fall, the people of Montgomery County swore they could still hear the sound of crackling wood, and a girl's faint laughter carried on the wind, circling the empty field that nobody dared to rebuild. When Sunday came, the bell of St. Matthew's rang louder than usual, echoing across the fields with a somber tone that seemed to carry more warning than welcome. The small community of Montgomery County filled the wooden pews, restless and murmur-filled. The storm of rumors surrounding the Cranes had shaken everyone's sense of quiet. Mothers held children closer, and the older men avoided looking one another in the eye. They had all heard the sheriff's story, the blood, the doll, the missing girl. Yet no one dared to repeat the details too loudly inside the house of God. The preacher, Reverend Cole, stood behind the pulpit, wringing his weathered hands around his Bible. His face looked drawn, his voice hoarse from sleepless nights. "There are things, my friends," he began, "that test the limits of our understanding. But no darkness, however terrible, can stand against the light of truth." His words seemed to fall flat against the wooden floor. No one stirred. Even the children stayed silent, sensing something heavy had taken hold of their elders. Halfway through the sermon, the church door creaked open. Heads turned. Standing on the threshold in the harsh brightness of noon was a small figure, barefoot, her white dress clinging with dust and rain. Lily Crane. Gasps cut through the silence. She stepped forward calmly, looking out at the gathered, faces with an expression that was at once innocent and ancient. In her arms she carried the porcelain doll. "Child," the preacher breathed, setting down his Bible. "You've been missed, Lily." "I know," she said. "Clara told me to come." The congregation watched as she moved down the aisle without hesitation and sat in the front pew, the doll resting on her knees. Her hair hung tangled around her shoulders, and her eyes flickered between the preacher and the cross above him. Reverend Cole swallowed and gestured for her to step closer. "Where's your mama, dear?" "She's resting at home." "And the sheriff?" He went away. A whisper of unease rippled through the crowd. The preacher's voice wavered. "Do you understand why everyone's been so worried? We just want to help." Lily tilted her head. "You can't help," she said softly. "The church doesn't help people like us. Clara says it hides them." The words fell cold like shards of glass. A woman in the second row crossed herself. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly, though the sky remained clear. Reverend Cole forced a trembling smile and stepped down from the dais, lowering his voice. "May I see the doll, child?" "No," Lily replied. "I'd just like to look." "She doesn't like to be looked at." His hand hovered anyway. The doll's eyes caught the sunlight from a nearby window, glimmering blue with an almost watery depth. Something about its face made the preacher freeze, a tiny dark seam around the lips, not quite paint, not quite shadow. He drew his hand back, heart thudding. "Very well," he murmured. He turned toward the congregation. "Let us pray." As he bowed his head, the sound of whispering rose again from the front pew. At first he thought Lily was praying too, but as he listened, the rhythm of her whisper was wrong, too steady, too deliberate. He opened his eyes. Her lips barely moved, but between her small hands, the doll seemed almost vibrant in the sunlight, its pale skin flashing once like polished glass. A sudden crack echoed through the sanctuary. The cross above the pulpit had leaned forward, one nail giving way, and struck the floor with a thud that made the room erupt in screams. Within the chaos, Lily stood slowly and turned toward the exit. "She doesn't like it here," she said, her soft voice somehow louder than the gasps and cries. Reverend Cole tried to stop her, stepping in front of the aisle, but her gaze met his, still and hollow. For a split second, he thought he saw something behind her eyes, a reflection of the doll's porcelain stare. He stepped aside. The door swung open, flooding the church with blistering light. Lily walked out, the doll clutched tight against her chest. Behind her, the murmurs rose into outrage. "The devil's in that thing," someone shouted. "Burn it!" But no one followed her outside. They stood frozen in fear as the heavy door closed, silencing the heat and the light in one breath. That afternoon the townsfolk gathered in the yard beside the church. Men fetched torches and shovels. Others argued whether it was sin to hunt a child. The preacher insisted they only needed to help her, bring her somewhere safe. But even his voice shook. "The girl's ill," he said. "She's lost." From the crowd, Mrs. Jefferson spoke up, barely audible. "She ain't lost. She found something that didn't belong to her. And it's still with her now." As dusk settled, a group of 5 men, including the preacher and the wounded sheriff, rode back toward the Crane house. The sheriff's arm was still wrapped, the swelling now dark and spreading, but he wouldn't be left behind. The road stretched silent under their hooves. When they reached the property, night had nearly fallen. Smoke curled faintly from somewhere beyond the orchard. The preacher called out, "Lily, it's Reverend Cole. We only wish to talk." The answer came not from the house but from the fields, a flicker of light among the pecan trees. They advanced slowly until they saw it, a small circle of candles arranged neatly in the dirt. Lily knelt in the middle, facing a basin filled with water that glowed faintly red in the candlelight. The doll sat beside it, hands folded, as if in prayer. "Lily," Cole said softly, stepping forward, "come away from there." "She says she's thirsty," Lily murmured. "She says I need to give more." "Give her what, child?" Lily turned her head slightly, eyes glinting. "What you all have too much of." The preacher raised a hand, signaling the men to stay back. "That doll's not alive, Lily. It's wood and paint, nothing more." Her voice hardened. "Then why does it remember?" Suddenly one of the candles sputtered out, then another. The wind rose sharply, swirling through the field, scattering ash and dust. The men stepped back, shielding their faces. The basin tipped, spilling the red water across the soil. When the gust finally ceased, the candles were gone, and so was Lily. Only the doll remained, half buried in dirt, its eyes fixed upward toward the preacher. He bent to pick it up, trembling. Its porcelain lips were curved in that same faint smile, but now a drop of fresh red glistened at the corner. Cole staggered backward, dropping it into the grass. The sheriff looked at him, pale-faced. "What in God's name do we do with it?" The preacher stared down, voice low. "We burn it." Before dawn, they built a small pyre in front of the house. The preacher threw the doll onto it, feeding the flames with kerosene. The porcelain cracked, popping in the fire like glass. They stood in silence until only ashes remained. But when the preacher returned home hours later and stepped into his parlor, something waited on his table. A small porcelain hand, perfectly clean, its painted nails gleaming faintly in the lamplight. He never told anyone what he saw that night, but from then on the bell of St. Matthew's never sounded the same again. It rang hollow, as if echoing from beneath the earth itself. In 1921, more than 20 years after the fires swallowed the Crane place, Sheriff Wallace's grandson found an iron lockbox hidden behind a loose plank in his grandfather's barn. Inside were several items preserved in silence: a tarnished badge, a rosary blackened with age, and a small leather-bound notebook. The handwriting within was shaky, uneven, written by a dying man who had known no peace in his final days. On the first page was a single line: "The truth of Lily Crane will not die with me." The journal revealed what the town had only guessed. In the weeks after the fire, while the rest of Montgomery tried to forget, Sheriff Wallace had gone back. He wrote that he couldn't sleep without seeing that doll's eyes, hearing the echoes of a child's voice calling from the ashes. He needed to know if anyone or anything was left on that land. One stormy night, he'd taken a lantern and ridden into the blackened field alone. The air smelled of rain and copper. The ground still steamed in places where heat had been trapped deep below. He described finding footprints near the charred remains of the pecan tree, tiny, barefoot prints pressed into the mud, fresh despite the rain. They led to what had once been the well. "There was singing," he wrote. "A child's humming, low and sweet. I thought my mind was gone until I saw her. Lily, or something that looked like her, standing beside the open well, the doll cradled against her chest like an infant. She wasn't burned," he noted. "She looked the same as the day she stepped out of that fire, though her eyes were wrong. Not dead, not alive, something in between." He claimed she spoke to him, told him the doll was never hers, that it belonged to her mother first, and before that to another mother and another before her. She said it carried everything they couldn't bury: grief, hunger, anger. Said it remembered every drop that ever touched it. The sheriff wrote that he reached out to take it from her, desperate to break whatever hold it had. She smiled at me, calm as Sunday. When his hand touched the porcelain, he felt a pulse. "Like a heartbeat," he wrote, his ink heavy and erratic. "It was warm." Then came the voice, not Lily's, but something older, whispering through his head as though the wind itself spoke. He dropped the doll into the well. "I watched it fall," the entry read. "Too long, too deep." The singing stopped. But so did she. He claimed Lily collapsed without a sound, her eyes open and unblinking, body sinking slowly as if the earth wanted her. Wallace covered the well himself, sealing it with timber and soil until the rain washed it away. After that night, his arm worsened. The black veins spread to his shoulder, crawling higher each day. "I can feel her still," he wrote. "In my blood, in the thunder." She said burning wouldn't stop her, that she only sleeps. His final words, written days before his death, were barely legible. "If they dig here again, they will wake her." For years, the lockbox stayed hidden. The grandson, a quiet man with more curiosity than caution, took it to the courthouse in 1922. The pages were read, dismissed, then locked away again as nonsense. Old ghosts, they said. The man was sick. But a copy somehow reached a reporter in Birmingham, and soon the story revived itself. The Crane legend spread once more, of the well, the fires, the child who fed her doll with blood. Travelers began visiting the field, now overgrown with wild grass, daring to find what remained. Most left disappointed. Some left frightened. One never left at all. That spring, young reporter Thomas Gray disappeared while investigating the site. Locals found his notebook near the old well pit, water stains peppering the pages. His last note described hearing the laughter of a girl. The sound came from underground. Stories multiplied. Children whispered them behind desks at school. Their parents pretended not to listen. They said that when lightning struck in late summer, it always hit that patch of land first, as though searching for what was buried beneath. They said the grass grew thicker there, richer, greener than anywhere else in the valley. A farmer swore he'd seen porcelain fragments scatter across his plough one morning, tiny shards that glittered white before sinking into the mud. By the 1930s, a few men from the county road crew dug near the area to lay drainage pipes. One of them struck something hard less than 3 feet down. Expecting stone, they pulled it free and found a small porcelain face, eyes unbroken, lips curved in that same faint smile. Within 2 weeks, the man who'd held it fell ill, covered in sores along one arm. He died before the month's end. His widow buried him in another county. Eventually, the site was fenced off. Locals avoided it altogether, marking it as cursed ground. Still, the story refused to die. Every decade or so, someone tried to prove it false. Scholars, thrill-seekers, preachers, convinced they could cast out whatever lingered. Each time, the stories returned louder. The preacher's family line carried its own scars. Reverend Cole's grandson, who later took over St. Matthew's, kept the church open but never touched the old bell. It cracked one morning as he tried to repair it, the sound sharp enough to wake half the town. From that day forward, it never rang again. He told parishioners he preferred silence. Yet one worshipper claimed to hear a soft hum during every service, like a tune a child once sang beneath the pecan tree. By the end of his journal, Wallace's grandson had written a single reflection. Maybe the fires weren't meant to destroy her, but to warn us. Every generation thinks they can end it, but she waits. The doll belonged to grief itself. In the courthouse archives today, they still keep the sheriff's original notebook, its pages sealed in glass to prevent decay. Visitors aren't allowed to handle it, but sometimes under the right light, the ink on the final page appears darker, as though freshly written. The caretakers dismiss it as humidity, a trick of preservation. Yet one janitor swears that during stormy nights, when thunder rolls through Montgomery, the case fogs from the inside, small handprints pressed against the glass, fading by morning. Decades passed and Alabama changed. Roads were paved, cars replaced wagons, and the old farmland turned to quiet suburbia. But the story of the Crane family survived every generation, whispered in schoolyards, printed in small-town newspapers whenever Halloween neared, retold by people who had never even seen the place. Most dismissed it as folklore, a local ghost story about guilt and madness. But to the few who lived near the overgrown remains of the Crane property, the name still carried unease. They would tell you the land itself had a memory. In 1958, construction crews began clearing part of the rural outskirts to make way for a new highway. Among the scrub and pines lay what remained of the old Crane field. The workers found a stone marker, uncut but deliberately placed, and beneath it traces of a collapsed well. When the foreman's shovel struck something hard and white, he cursed, thinking it porcelain pipe. They dug it free and brushed away the dirt, a doll's torso smooth and unnervingly clean despite the decades underground. The men laughed it off. One pocketed a shard of the broken face as a keepsake. Within a week, he lost 3 fingers in an accident at the site. The rest refused to touch it again. The doll pieces were sent to the Montgomery Museum of History, where they were labeled 19th century porcelain children's toy, origin unknown. The exhibit was modest, a glass case with a single porcelain head placed atop black velvet. Visitors came and went, few bothering to read the placard. Yet the staff noticed something strange. The head never gathered dust. Its surface remained flawless, as though newly polished each morning. Though the case hadn't been opened since installation, at night, the museum guards sometimes heard faint tapping from the display hall, a rhythmic sound like fingernails against glass. They blamed rodents, but one guard, an older man named Reeves, swore he saw condensation forming on the inside of the case, as if the thing were breathing. By the late 1970s, the legend found a new audience. A local historian named Charles Dutton devoted years to writing a book about rural Alabama myths. The final chapter focused on the Crane House tragedy and included photographs of the museum piece. In interviews, he insisted the doll wasn't cursed, only misunderstood. "It's a symbol of obsession," he said. "People give meaning to what frightens them." 2 months before the book's release, the museum caught fire after closing. Sprinklers saved most of the collection, but the Crane exhibit was destroyed, or so everyone thought. When the ashes cooled, the workers found a single porcelain face intact and untouched by smoke. They placed it in storage, hidden away, yet somehow it returned. Each year the staff would find the same head back in the exhibit case, centered perfectly, glass unbroken. Finally, in 1984, the museum curator decided not to fight it. He restored the display permanently, adding a new description plate, recovered from Crane property, 1899, associated with the historical event known as the feeding doll case, exact artist unknown. From then on, crowds grew. Visitors left uneasy, claiming the doll's eyes followed them. One child fainted after saying she heard it whisper. The curator smiled for photographs, insisting it was all illusion, a product of suggestion. By the 1990s, the artifact had become a local phenomenon. College students dared each other to visit and stare into its eyes for a full minute. The lights of their camera flashes painted blue reflections across the doll's smooth face, but a few of them returned weeks later, jittery and pale, muttering about dreams of a small girl kneeling by a well. One swore she woke one night to find dirt on her pillow and water dripping from her hands. When the museum underwent renovation in 2006, staff moved the exhibit to storage once again. This time, they catalogued every item and locked the crate in an underground vault. At least that's what they believed. 9 months later, the curator received a package from an anonymous donor, a glass globe containing the same porcelain head, sealed within and filled with clear liquid. No return address, no records of shipment. The curator quit his job that year, saying only that he felt watched. Today, the display rests in a climate-controlled room, part of a permanent collection titled Legends of the Deep South. The doll's head remains flawless, no cracks, no signs of age, its impossible smoothness reflecting the ceiling lights like ice. Guides tell the story to tourists with theatrical flourish, calling it the child who fed her doll with blood. The crowd always reacts the same: uneasy laughter, nervous glances, whispers of disbelief. But each tour ends the same way. A guest lingers behind, drawn close to the glass, staring at the perfect face. One such visitor, a teacher named Eliza Moore, stayed late after a school trip. Security logs later showed she entered the room alone at 4:37 p.m. and never left through the front doors. Her bag was found beside the display, keys still inside. When police arrived, the glass case stood open, the doll's head gone. Only a single note remained on the velvet base, written in neat, childish handwriting. "She's thirsty again." Surveillance footage failed to explain it. Cameras flickered once at the exact moment before her disappearance, then resumed recording an empty room. In 3 frames before the glitch, a faint reflection appeared against the glass, a silhouette of a small girl holding something in her arms. In 2025, the museum reopened the exhibit with a replica model. The original remains missing, though the curator admits quietly that replacements never stay blank for long. "Something always appears in the eyes," he confessed to a reporter. "At first it's shadow, then color, then shape. A reflection that shouldn't be there." He refused to elaborate. Visitors still come from far away, curious tourists, skeptics, historians, each drawn to the same inexplicable feeling of being watched. The staff say it's imagination, the mind's way of honoring old fears. But locals don't buy that. On rainy nights, when lightning mirrors across the museum's tall windows, some claim they hear the echo of a girl's laughter, drifting through the empty halls, faint and distant, followed by the soft tick of porcelain against glass, like a heartbeat in a place that has none. And sometimes, when the lights flicker before closing, guides swear they see fresh fingerprints on the inside of the display case, small, perfect and wet, as though pressed there by hands that were never supposed to return. Every family hides secrets, some so dark they should never see the light of day. Here, we open the doors to those shadowed pasts, uncovering hidden crimes, silent pacts, and stories that echo like ghosts through the halls of memory. If you've made it this far, it means you also carry that forbidden curiosity. So don't hesitate. Subscribe to the channel now, turn on the bell, and follow our next revelations. Because every day, new secrets emerge, and only those who dare to face the truth remain to hear them.